Hey guys, tonight we are going to delve into something profoundly practical, something anciently essential, yet so exquisitely mundane it's almost guaranteed to lull you into a state of serene oblivion. Imagine you're there, deep in the humid, emerald embrace of the Mesoamerican jungle, the air thick as a jaguar's sigh, and your task for the day, perhaps your life's work if you mess up too often, is learning how to evenly apply pine resin on a Maya Arrowhead. Sounds thrilling, right? Well, it's the kind of thrill that involves a lot of patient waiting and very sticky fingers. And let's be honest, if you were actually tasked with this in ancient times without a lifetime of experience, you probably wouldn't survive this lesson, let alone the first hunting trip. Your arrows would fall apart, your dinner would scamper off, and you'd become an amusing anecdote for the village elders. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world, so drop that in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that truly hits you is the air. It's not just air, it's a physical presence, warm and wet, clinging to your skin like a second, unwanted layer of clothing. You feel a bead of sweat trace a slow, meandering path down your temple, a tiny river carving its course through the dust of your journey. You've been walking for what feels like days, though your guide, a man named Balaam whose leathery skin speaks of countless suns and rains, probably considers it a short stroll to the corner store. The path, if you can call it that, is a barely discernible parting in the undergrowth, a suggestion more than a trail. Giant buttress roots of ceiba trees, sacred to the Maya as the world tree connecting the heavens, the earth, and the underworld of Xibalba, rise like cathedral walls on either side, draped in a riot of vines and epiphytes. The sounds are a symphony, or perhaps a cacophony, depending on your city-dweller ears. Howler monkeys roar in the distance, a sound so primal it vibrates in your bones. Closer, 1,000 unseen insects buzz, chirp, and click, a relentless, shimmering curtain of sound. A flash of iridescent blue, a morpho butterfly, flits past, its wings like stained glass catching the dappled sunlight that manages to pierce the dense canopy far, far above. You brush at a mosquito attempting a landing on your arm, already part of the local welcoming committee that seems to view you as a walking buffet. Balaam just grunts, a sound that could mean anything from don't worry to you're doomed. You finally emerge into a small clearing. A cluster of thatched roof huts, their walls made of wattle and daub, stands nestled amongst carefully tended garden plots. Smoke, smelling of wood and cooking beans, curls lazily from a cooking fire. This isn't one of the grand Maya city-states like Tikal or Palenque, with their towering stone pyramids and intricate stelae. This is a smaller, more intimate settlement, perhaps a village that supplies resources to a nearby urban center, or maybe it's just far enough away to enjoy a certain autonomy. The Maya civilization, after all, wasn't a single monolithic empire but a complex network of interconnected, and sometimes warring, kingdoms and communities. Historians still argue whether the perceived collapse of the classic Maya civilization was a uniform event or a more staggered, regional transformation over centuries. Your arrival doesn't go unnoticed. Children, previously chasing a dog that looks more like a lean shadow than a pet, stop and stare, their dark eyes wide with curiosity. An old woman, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, pauses from grinding maize on a metate, her gaze appraising. Balaam says something in the local dialect, a series of soft clicks and glottal stops that sound like the forest itself speaking. The tension, if there was any, seems to ease. You are, it appears, expected. He leads you towards one of the huts, slightly larger than the others, its thatch roof looking particularly well maintained. This, you understand, is where your education will begin. Your task, simple in its telling but complex in its execution, is to learn the art of hafting an arrowhead. Specifically, the even application of pine resin, the superglue of the ancient world, the critical bond between deadly stone and swift shaft. It's a skill passed down through generations, vital for hunting, for defense, for survival. And you, with your soft hands and probably an alarming lack of practical skills by jungle standards, are here to learn. One wonders if they have an apprentice program for people who are more likely to accidentally glue their fingers together than craft a lethal weapon. Inside the hut, it's cooler, the thick thatch insulating against the sun's fierce eye. The air smells of dried herbs, smoke, and something else, a faint, sharp, yet pleasant aroma. Pine. Your heart gives a little flutter of anticipation, or perhaps it's just the lingering effects of the jungle humidity finally getting to you. An older man sits on a low stool, his hands busy with a piece of dark, volcanic glass, obsidian. He doesn't look up immediately, his focus absolute. This is Kook, the master craftsman, the one who will guide your clumsy efforts. His silence is not unkind, merely the quiet confidence of someone who knows his craft intimately. You are here, in the heart of the Maya world, ready to learn a skill that has sustained these people for millennia, a skill that connects the forest's resources with the very means of life and death. The journey was long, the air is still thick enough to swim through, but you're here. The real work is about to begin, and the pine resin awaits. Kook finally looks up, his eyes, though old, are sharp and miss nothing. He gestures with a chin, not a hand, towards a collection of tools and materials laid out on a woven mat. Your attention, however, is drawn to the implied first step, acquiring the resin. He doesn't speak your language, and you certainly don't speak his, beyond a few nervously practiced pleasantries that Balaam taught you, which probably sound like a strangled parrot to native ears. Communication will be a matter of observation, gesture, and a healthy dose of hopeful interpretation. He grunts, a sound that's surprisingly expressive in its brevity, and then points towards the jungle, specifically towards a stand of taller trees in the distance. The message is clear, your quest for the perfect pine begins. You step back out into the humid embrace of the clearing, Balaam at your side once more. The sun, now higher in the sky, beats down with an intensity that makes the air shimmer above the packed earth. You try to recall everything you know about pine trees. Not just any pine will do, you surmise. There must be specific types, or perhaps specific conditions, that yield the best resin for arrowhead adhesion. Is it an older tree? A younger one? One growing in a particular type of soil? These are the nuances that separate the master craftsman from the bumbling amateur, the kind of amateur who, as we've established, probably doesn't last long. As you re-enter the shade of the forest, the temperature drops a few degrees, a welcome, if slight, relief. Balaam moves with an effortless grace, his bare feet seeming to know every root and stone. You, on the other hand, feel like a newborn foal, all gangly limbs and uncertain footing. He occasionally points out plants, naming them in his tongue. You nod, trying to commit the sounds and shapes to memory, though you suspect most of it will evaporate like morning mist. One plant he indicates, with a reddish tinge to its leaves, he mimes crushing and rubbing on his skin, then makes a buzzing sound and swats at the air. Ah, insect repellent. You wish you'd known about that about an hour ago. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen the ancient Egyptians supposedly used? This seems marginally more pleasant. The search isn't for just any pine tree, but for the pine tree. You pass several, but Balaam dismisses them with a subtle shake of his head or a slight detour in your path. You start to notice differences. Some are too young, their bark too smooth. Others look old and gnarled, but perhaps they are past their prime for resin production. You're looking for a tree that's mature, healthy, and, as you'll soon learn, already showing signs of weeping, small, amber-like tears of resin on its bark. This indicates a good flow. The Maya, like many indigenous cultures, had an incredibly deep understanding of their environment, a botanical knowledge that modern science is still catching up with. They knew the specific properties of hundreds, if not thousands, of plants, not just for food and medicine, but for construction, tools, and ritual. You come across a tree that Balaam circles slowly, his eyes scanning its trunk from base to the lower branches. It's a tall specimen, its bark rugged and deeply fissured, with a distinctive reddish-brown hue. This is likely a species of Pinus ocarpa or Pinus carabea, both native to the region and known for their resinous properties. He taps it in a few places, listening. What he's listening for, you have no idea. Perhaps the hollowness indicates something about the sap flow, or maybe he's just checking for termites who might have gotten there first. It's a good reminder that even seemingly simple tasks are layered with generations of accumulated knowledge. He nods, satisfied. This is the one. He then hands you a small, sharp stone tool, perhaps a chert blade. It's not for cutting down the tree, of course, but for the delicate work of tapping it. There's a respect inherent in the process. You don't just take from the forest without a certain mindfulness. The tree is a living entity, providing a vital resource. One quirky tidbit is that some ancient cultures believed trees had spirits, and offerings or permissions were sometimes sought before taking from them. Whether the Maya held this exact belief for every pine is debatable, but a general reverence for nature was certainly woven into their worldview. Balaam demonstrates, making a shallow, diagonal cut in the bark, not too deep to harm the tree excessively, but enough to encourage the flow of its sticky lifeblood. Then another cut below it, forming a V shape. He does this a few times around the trunk, at a comfortable working height. The resin, a pale, golden color, almost translucent, begins to ooze slowly from the fresh wounds, glistening in the filtered sunlight. It smells wonderfully aromatic, a clean, sharp scent of pine that cuts through the damp, earthy smell of the jungle floor. It's surprisingly potent. You can already imagine how, when heated, it will become the perfect adhesive. Now it's your turn. He hands you the stone tool. It feels awkward in your hand, unaccustomed to such implements. Your first attempt is too tentative, barely scratching the surface. Balaam makes a noise, a soft clucking sound of gentle correction, and guides your hand, showing you the right pressure, the right angle. It's harder than it looks. The bark is tough, and this stone tool, while sharp, requires a specific technique. You're trying not to hack at the tree like a barbarian, but to make clean, efficient cuts. After a few tries, you manage a reasonably decent V, and a slow trickle of resin begins to appear. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. You wouldn't want to be paid by the pint for this work, that's for sure. It's a slow, patient harvest. You continue around the tree, making more taps under Balaam's watchful eye. It's methodical work, almost meditative. The sounds of the jungle, which seemed so overwhelming at first, begin to recede into a background hum. Your focus narrows to the tree, the tool, the emerging resin. This is the first, crucial ingredient. Without this sticky gold, there is no hafting, no secure arrowhead, no successful hunt. Your quest for the perfect pine tree has reached its immediate goal, but the journey of transforming its gift into a functional adhesive is only just beginning. The tiny, glistening drops are a promise of the strength to come. With the chosen pine now gently weeping its precious offering, the next step is collection. Balaam produces a few large leaves, surprisingly sturdy and broad, perhaps from a type of palm or a plant specifically cultivated for its utility as a temporary container. He also has a small, shallow ceramic bowl, unglazed and utilitarian, a piece of everyday Maya pottery. The kind of thing archaeologists love to find, as pottery styles are key indicators of time periods and cultural connections. You wonder if, 1,000 years from now, someone will be puzzling over the remnants of your discarded plastic water bottle with the same scholarly intensity. He shows you how to carefully position a leaf beneath the lowest point of each V-cut, angling it slightly so that the slowly accumulating resin will drip onto it, rather than running wastefully down the trunk. Some of the resin is already thick enough to be scraped off gently with a smooth, flat piece of wood he provides. It's incredibly sticky, as you quickly discover when a glob of it attaches itself to your fingers with the tenacity of a lovesick limpet. This stuff could probably give modern duct tape a run for its money. Trying to wipe it off on a nearby leaf only makes things worse. Now you have resin and leaf bits. Balaam watches your struggle with what might be the faintest flicker of amusement in his eyes, or perhaps it's just your imagination. He then calmly scrapes his own fingers clean against the edge of the ceramic bowl, a much more sensible approach. The process of tapping the sticky gold is slow. You don't just gash the tree and expect a flood. It's a patient encouragement, a series of small invitations for the tree to share its bounty. Each droplet that swells and falls seems to take an eternity. You move from one tapping point to another, checking the flow, gently scraping the accumulated resin into the ceramic bowl or onto the collection leaves. The sun climbs higher, and the jungle heat intensifies, even in the shade. Sweat drips steadily from your brow, and you're grateful for the insect repellent Balaam showed you earlier, though a few particularly determined mosquitoes still manage to find an untreated spot. You can see why an even application of this stuff is going to be an art form. It wants to go everywhere but where you intend it. Historians still argue whether the Maya actively managed pine forests for resin production, perhaps through selective pruning or even planting, or if they primarily relied on wild stands. Given their sophisticated agricultural practices with crops like maize, beans, and squash, it's plausible they applied similar principles to other valuable forest resources. The resin wasn't just for arrowheads. It was used as incense. Copal, a different type of resin, was particularly prized for rituals, but pine resin also had its uses, as a sealant for pottery, for waterproofing, and likely for medicinal purposes too. It was a versatile and valuable commodity. You notice that Balaam is very particular about not taking too much from any single tree. He leaves many of the existing, naturally hardened resin tears on the bark undisturbed. This sustainable harvesting ensures the tree remains healthy and productive for future needs. It's a stark contrast to some modern resource exploitation, a lesson in living in balance with the environment that we could certainly stand to relearn. He also seems to favor resin that has a slightly amber, almost orange hue, over the very pale, almost clear stuff. Perhaps this indicates a different consistency or drying property. These are the subtle details of an ancient craft, learned through countless repetitions and observations. After an hour or so, the ceramic bowl is perhaps a quarter full, and you have a few leaves laden with glistening, sticky mounds. It doesn't look like much, considering the effort involved. You wonder how many arrows this modest amount will be able to haft. Probably not an army's worth. This makes each arrow, each tool, even more valuable. It's not just a disposable item, it's the result of considerable time, effort, and specialized knowledge. It makes you think about the sheer number of arrows that would have been used in a Maya hunt or a skirmish. The logistics of keeping a group of archers supplied would have been a significant undertaking. As you gather your sticky harvest, Balaam points to a different kind of deposit on another nearby pine. It's much darker, almost black, and hardened into brittle chunks. He scrapes a piece off and crumbles it in his fingers. This, he indicates, is old resin, perhaps less suitable for the fine work of arrowhead hafting, or maybe it's used for other purposes, like starting fires or creating a smokier incense. The nuances are endless. One quirky, though perhaps not entirely fringe, tidbit is the use of resin in ancient dentistry. While more documented in other cultures, the antibacterial properties of pine resin might have made it a useful, if sticky, filling or poultice for toothaches. Imagine your dentist pulling out a glob of pine sap, open wide. With the collection complete, Balaam carefully folds the resin-laden leaves to protect their contents and places them, along with the ceramic bowl, into a woven bag. Your fingers are a mess. You try rubbing them with dry dirt, which helps a little, creating tiny, resinous mud balls that you can then pick off. It's not exactly a spot treatment, but it's marginally effective. You're beginning to appreciate the sheer practicality of people who lived so close to nature. They had solutions for everything, born of necessity and ingenuity. The walk back to the village seems shorter, or perhaps you're just getting more accustomed to the rhythm of the jungle. The light is beginning to soften as the afternoon wears on, and the shadows lengthen. You carry the precious, sticky gold with a newfound respect. It's not just tree sap, it's a vital component of survival, a testament to the Maya's deep connection with their world. Back in the village, Cook awaits. The next stage of the process, transforming this raw, sticky mess into a refined, workable adhesive, is about to begin. And you suspect it will involve heat, more scraping, and probably more opportunities to get stuck to everything in a 5-foot radius. Back in Cook's hut, the air still holds that faint, sharp scent of pine, now mingling with the earthy aroma of the hut itself and the lingering smokiness from the village fires. Cook inspects your hard-won resin with a critical eye. He pokes at the contents of the ceramic bowl with a wooden stick, then examines the resin collected on the leaves. He grunts, a sound that, by now, you're starting to interpret as a grudging not bad for a beginner who probably trips over their own feet in broad daylight. Or maybe it just means resin. The ambiguity is part of the charm, you tell yourself. Now that the primary adhesive is secured, your attention is guided towards the other components necessary for creating a deadly, functional arrow, the rest of the hafting kit. Cook gestures to a bundle of long, straight sticks resting in a corner of the hut. These are the arrow shafts. They are light, yet strong, likely made from a specific type of reed or a carefully selected hardwood sapling, straightened and seasoned over time. The Maya, like many archery traditions, understood the importance of a straight, well-balanced shaft for accurate flight. Finding wood that grew perfectly straight was rare, so they developed methods of straightening shafts using heat and pressure, a painstaking process in itself. You can imagine someone spending hours just preparing a single shaft, long before it ever meets an arrowhead. He selects one of the shafts and hands it to you. It's surprisingly smooth, almost polished from handling. He then points to its end, indicating where the arrowhead will eventually be attached, the forend. He also draws your attention to the other end, showing you a small, carefully carved notch. This is the nock, which will grip the bowstring. Every part of the arrow is purposeful, refined through generations of trial and error. Historians still argue whether Maya bows were typically self-bows, made from a single piece of wood, or if composite bows were also in use, though evidence for the latter in this specific region is less common. The bows themselves would have been powerful, designed to drive an arrow with enough force to pierce animal hide or, in unfortunate circumstances, human adversaries. Next, Cook picks up a small, dried bundle that looks like a collection of pale, translucent ribbons. He pulls one free and holds it up. It's sinew, animal tendon, likely from a deer or other large game animal. When dry, it's incredibly tough, and when moistened, it becomes pliable, shrinking and tightening as it dries again, creating a powerful binding. This will be used to reinforce the attachment of the arrowhead to the shaft, working in concert with the pine resin. You can see how these natural materials, each with its own unique properties, are ingeniously combined. It's a kind of ancient composite technology. You make a mental note not to ask what part of the deer it came from. Some things are better left to the imagination, especially if you've just had venison stew for lunch. Then there are the tools. You've already had a brief, sticky encounter with a stone scraper. Cook has a variety of these, small flakes of chert or obsidian, each with a specific edge, some sharper for cutting, others duller for scraping or smoothing. There's also a piece of rough, abrasive stone, perhaps sandstone, used like ancient sandpaper for shaping and smoothing the wooden shafts. He shows you a harder, pointed stone tool, an awl, likely used for drilling or making precise indentations. And, of course, there's the ever-present fire. A small, controlled fire pit glows in the center of the hut, not just for warmth or cooking in this context, but as an essential tool for working with the resin. This isn't the roaring bonfire of a celebration, it's a craftsman's fire, carefully managed for its heat. Cook also indicates a few other items whose purpose isn't immediately obvious. There are small gourds, some containing water, others holding fine, dark powders. You'll learn about these later, you suspect. For now, your focus is on the primary components: resin, shaft, sinew, and arrowhead. Speaking of which, Cook now turns his attention back to the piece of obsidian he was working on when you first entered. This is where the real artistry and lethality comes into play. One quirky tidbit about ancient toolkits is the occasional discovery of mystery tools, objects found in archaeological digs whose exact purpose remains unknown, sparking much debate among specialists. Perhaps one of Cook's less obvious implements would fall into that category for a future archaeologist. He doesn't offer you a chance to try your hand at knapping the obsidian. That's a skill far beyond your current pay grade, and frankly, you'd probably end up with more blood on the floor than usable flakes. Obsidian, or volcanic glass, is incredibly sharp, capable of holding an edge sharper than modern surgical steel. But it's also brittle and requires immense skill to shape. He holds the obsidian core, and with a piece of antler or hard bone serving as a pressure flaker, he expertly detaches small, razor-sharp flakes. Each movement is precise, economical, born of long practice. It's almost hypnotic to watch. You are assembling not just an arrow, but a small technological marvel, a culmination of deep environmental knowledge and skilled craftsmanship. Each element has been carefully sourced, prepared, and is now ready to be combined. The resin you tapped from the pine, the shaft straightened from a forest reed, the sinew processed from a hunted animal, and the arrowhead flaked from volcanic stone, all parts of a puzzle that, when assembled correctly, means the difference between a full belly and an empty one, or between safety and vulnerability. The weight of this responsibility, even in this simulated learning environment, feels surprisingly real. You're no longer just a passive observer, you're part of the process, however clumsy your contribution with the resin collection might have been. The hafting kit is nearly complete, and the sharp, gleaming point of the arrowhead awaits its sticky embrace. With the arrow shaft selected and the sinew ready, Cook now directs your full attention to the star of the show, at least in terms of its business end, the arrowhead itself. He lays out a few finished points on a piece of soft deer hide. They gleam dully in the hut's dim light, some a deep, lustrous black, obsidian, others a more muted gray or brownish hue, likely chert or flint. Each one is a small masterpiece of lethal artistry. You lean closer, careful not to breathe too heavily, as if the slightest puff of air might disturb their dangerous perfection. He picks up one of the obsidian points. It's roughly triangular, with a slightly concave base and wickedly sharp edges. The facets left by the pressure flaking catch the light, revealing the conchoidal fractures characteristic of obsidian. It feels cool and smooth in his calloused fingers, yet you know that edge could slice through hide and flesh with terrifying ease. The sharpness is almost an abstract concept until you see it up close, handled by someone who understands its potential. He runs a thumb, very carefully, you note, along one of the edges, not to test its sharpness in a way that would draw blood, but perhaps to feel for any imperfections, any slight dullness that might compromise its penetration. You instinctively curl your own fingers, imagining the sting. He then hands you one, not the obsidian, but a chert point. It's heavier than you expect for its size, denser, with a slightly rougher texture than the glassy obsidian. The edges are still incredibly sharp, though perhaps not with the almost supernatural keenness of volcanic glass. Chert, being more widely available in many regions than obsidian, which often had to be traded over long distances, was a common material for everyday tools and projectile points. The Maya had extensive trade networks, and valuable goods like obsidian, jade, salt, and cacao beans moved across the Yucatan Peninsula and beyond. The presence of obsidian in a settlement like this speaks to its connections, however distant, to those networks. You turn the chert arrowhead over in your palm, examining its form. The base, the part that will be hafted into the arrow shaft, is often shaped differently depending on the intended method of attachment. Some might be tanged, with a protruding stem that fits into a slot in the shaft. Others, like this one, might be stemmed and barbed, or have notches on the sides for securing the sinew binding. Cook points to the slight indentations or notches near the base of the point you're holding, indicating where the sinew will eventually provide its crucial reinforcement. It's all about creating multiple points of contact and maximizing the strength of the bond. No one wants their arrowhead to pop off mid-flight, unless they're aiming for a very surprised squirrel who then makes off with their precious point. That would be embarrassing. He shows you another point, this one smaller and more slender, perhaps intended for birds or smaller game. Then a larger, broader one, possibly for larger animals like deer or peccary, or even for warfare. The design varies with the intended purpose. Some arrowheads were even designed to break off in the wound, causing more damage or making extraction more difficult. A rather grim thought, but a practical consideration in a world where survival often depended on the effectiveness of your hunting and defensive tools. Historians still argue whether certain elaborate, finely made flint or chert objects, sometimes called eccentric flints, found in Maya caches and burials were functional tools or purely ceremonial objects, perhaps representing lightning bolts or other powerful symbols. Some are so complex they defy easy explanation as mere utilitarian items. Cook takes back the chert point and selects another obsidian one. He scrutinizes its base, the part that will receive the resin. It needs to be clean, free of dust or grease, to ensure the best possible adhesion. He might even lightly abrade the surface with a piece of rough stone to give the resin a better grip, a bit like scuffing a surface before applying modern glue. You notice tiny, almost invisible, ripples on the surface of the obsidian, marks left by the flaking process. These slight irregularities, far from being imperfections, would likely help the resin key into the stone. It's a subtle interplay between the material's natural properties and the craftsman's skill. He then mimes the motion of the arrow striking its target, a swift, sharp thrust. He emphasizes the impact, the shock that the arrowhead and its hafting must withstand. It's not just about gluing it on, it's about creating a bond that can survive immense stress. This is why the even application of resin, and the subsequent sinew binding, is so critical. Any weakness, any unevenness, could lead to failure at the crucial moment. You imagine the force involved, the sudden deceleration as the arrow hits. The physics of it are quite brutal. You consider the journey of this small piece of stone. Formed in the fiery heart of a volcano, treated perhaps across mountains and jungles, then painstakingly shaped by human hands into a tool of life and death. It's a humbling thought. The Maya valued obsidian highly, not just for its utility but also for its symbolic power. It was associated with lightning, with warfare, and with ritual sacrifice. Mirrors made of polished obsidian were used for scrying and divination, believed to be portals to other realms. So, this arrowhead isn't just a sharp rock, it's imbued with cultural significance, a piece of the cosmos shaped for a very earthly purpose. As Cook sets the arrowhead down, you feel a deeper appreciation for the object. It's no longer just a pointy bit. It's the culmination of geological processes, long-distance trade, incredible artisanship, and profound cultural meaning. And it's about to get very, very sticky. The appraisal is complete, the quality confirmed. The stone is ready. The next step is to prepare the resin itself, that golden treasure you helped collect from the forest, transforming it from raw sap into a sophisticated, reliable adhesive. The quiet focus in the hut intensifies. The crucial stages of assembly are approaching. The arrowheads, assessed and deemed worthy, now wait patiently on their deerskin mat. Cook turns his attention to the ceramic bowl containing the raw pine resin you so diligently and stickily collected earlier. He also retrieves the resin-laden leaves, carefully unfolding them to reveal the amber globs. It's time for the resin's first cleanse, a process of heating and filtering that will remove impurities and bring it to the right consistency for application. You can already smell the pine scent intensifying as the materials are brought closer to the small, glowing fire pit in the center of the hut. Cook selects a slightly larger, shallow ceramic dish, different from the collection bowl. This one looks like it has seen considerable use. Its interior is darkened and coated with the residue of countless resin heating sessions. It's the ancient equivalent of your favorite, well-seasoned cast iron skillet, the one you'd never dream of scrubbing too vigorously lest you remove its magical properties, or, in this case, its non-stick coating of carbonized resin. He carefully scrapes the resin from the leaves into this dish, adding it to the resin already in the collection bowl. He uses a smooth wooden paddle, occasionally dipping it in water, which seems to help prevent the resin from sticking too badly to the tool. A neat trick, and one you file away for future reference, should you ever find yourself in a similar sticky situation. Probably not likely, but hey, you never know when ancient Maya adhesive skills might come in handy at a poorly planned craft fair. He then places the ceramic dish near the edge of the fire, not directly in the flames, but close enough to receive its gentle, radiant heat. The goal is to melt the resin slowly and evenly, not to boil or scorch it. Scorched resin would likely become brittle and lose its adhesive strength. This requires patience and constant attention, adjusting the dish's position, turning it to ensure even heating. You watch as the resin, initially a collection of semi-solid lumps and viscous drips, gradually begins to soften and liquefy. The aroma in the hut becomes even more pronounced, a rich, balsamic perfume that's surprisingly pleasant, like walking through a pine forest on a hot day. As the resin melts, impurities begin to make themselves known. Tiny bits of bark, stray insects that met a sticky end, poor fellas, they were just looking for a sweet treat, dust, and leaf fragments float to the surface or remain suspended in the golden liquid. Cook uses his wooden paddle, and sometimes a smaller, pointed stick, to meticulously skim these impurities off the top, flicking them into the fire where they hiss and briefly flare up. It's a bit like clarifying butter, removing the milk solids to get pure, golden fat. Here, you're removing the forest floor to get pure, golden adhesive. He also adds a tiny bit of water to the dish. This seems counterintuitive. Aren't you trying to create a waterproof bond? But the small amount of water, perhaps, helps to regulate the temperature, preventing the resin from overheating, and may also aid in separating some impurities. The Maya were masters of subtle chemistry, even if they didn't have formal laboratories or chemical equations. Their knowledge was empirical, based on generations of observation and experimentation. What worked, worked, and that knowledge was preserved and passed down. Once the resin is fully melted and most of the larger impurities have been skimmed off, Cook prepares for the filtering stage. He takes another, smaller, clean ceramic pot and stretches a piece of loosely woven fabric across its mouth, securing it with a piece of fiber cord. The fabric looks like it might be made from agave fibers, something like a coarse burlap. This will act as a sieve. This filtering step is crucial for achieving that smooth, even application you're aiming for. You wouldn't want a lump of bark stuck under your arrowhead, creating a weak spot. Historians still argue whether the Maya used specific types of fabric or natural sieves, like certain types of porous fungi or even layers of specific grasses, for this fine filtering process. The archaeological record for such delicate organic materials is, understandably, quite sparse. With steady hands, Cook carefully picks up the hot ceramic dish, using a piece of folded hide to protect his fingers, a detail you appreciate as you imagine your own less calloused digits attempting the same feat. and slowly pours the molten resin through the fabric filter into the clean pot below. The resin, now a clearer, more uniform amber liquid, drips slowly through. It's a hotter, more fluid version of the sticky gold you collected earlier. Some thicker, more stubborn bits of debris are caught by the filter. The process is unhurried, deliberate. There's no rushing this. You can see how each step builds upon the last, a chain of careful actions leading to the desired result. The selection of the tree, the careful tapping, the patient collection, the gentle heating, the meticulous skimming, and now the fine filtering. Each stage is essential. Skip one, or do it poorly, and the final product will suffer. It's a good lesson in craftsmanship, applicable to almost anything, from making an arrow to, well, writing a very long script about making an arrow. One quirky tidbit is that pine resin, in some cultures, was chewed like gum. You are the bubbling, hot liquid and decide that perhaps you'll stick to modern chewing gum, which is considerably less likely to cement your jaw shut permanently. The filtered resin in the new pot is cleaner, purer. It still needs to be kept warm, however, as it will begin to solidify as it cools. Coop places this pot near the fire as well, maintaining its liquid state. This isn't the final adhesive mixture yet. There are still additives to consider, secret ingredients that will modify its properties. But the first cleanse is complete. The raw material has been refined, prepared for the next stage of its transformation. You are one step closer to understanding the complex alchemy required to bind stone to wood, to create a tool that can fly true and strike hard. The scent of pine is now deeply ingrained in the air of the hut, and perhaps, just a little, in your own clothes. You're starting to smell like a very serious ancient craftsman, or possibly a walking air freshener. The pot of filtered, molten pine resin now sits gently warming by the fire, its surface gleaming like liquid amber. It's cleaner, yes, but Kook isn't finished with it yet. Pure pine resin on its own can sometimes be too brittle when it fully hardens, especially in cooler temperatures, or perhaps too soft and tacky in the intense jungle heat. To achieve the perfect balance of adhesion, flexibility, and durability, the Maya, like many ancient craftsmen, often mixed in temper agents. This is where the real secret sauce comes into play, the subtle additions that fine-tune the properties of the adhesive. Kook now turns his attention to a small collection of gourds and pouches you noticed earlier, the ones containing those mysterious fine, dark powders. He takes a pinch of black powder from one small, stoppered gourd. It looks like soot or finely ground charcoal. He adds a small amount to the molten resin, stirring it in slowly and thoroughly with his wooden paddle. The clear amber liquid gradually darkens, becoming more opaque, taking on a rich, deep brown, almost black hue. Charcoal, being a form of carbon, is an excellent tempering agent. It can increase the viscosity of the resin, make it less prone to cracking, and potentially improve its resistance to moisture and temperature changes. You can imagine how a craftsman, through trial and error over generations, would discover that resin mixed with the black dust from the fire pit made for a stronger, more reliable bond. It's the kind of practical science born from keen observation. Next, he reaches for another small pouch, this one containing what looks like flakes of beeswax. He adds a few small pieces to the mixture, and they quickly melt into the hot resin. Beeswax is another common additive in ancient adhesives. It can impart flexibility to the resin, preventing it from becoming too brittle and prone to shattering on impact. It can also improve the resin's waterproofing qualities and its tackiness, helping it to grip the arrowhead and shaft more effectively. The Maya, of course, were skilled beekeepers, particularly of native stingless bees, Melipona species, and honey and wax were valuable products used for food, ritual, and trade. So, access to beeswax would have been readily available. The thought of those stingless bees is a bit of a relief. You're not sure you'd want to be harvesting wax from the more aggressive varieties without a modern bee suit. One sting is annoying, a swarm is a nope, I'm out of here situation. Kook stirs the concoction patiently, ensuring the charcoal and beeswax are fully incorporated, creating a homogeneous mixture. The consistency of the resin changes subtly. It seems thicker now, more viscous, less like thin syrup and more like warm honey or molasses. He lifts the paddle, and the resin drizzles off in a slow, steady stream, no longer clear but a deep, rich, almost black color. This is the high-performance adhesive, customized for the task at hand. It's a far cry from the raw, sticky sap you collected from the tree. Historians still argue whether other additives were commonly used by the Maya in their hafting adhesives. Some researchers suggest that materials like laterite, a type of iron-rich soil, fine sand, or even powdered shell might have been incorporated to add bulk, strength, or abrasive qualities to the resin. The exact recipes likely varied by region, by the specific materials being hafted, and even by the preference of the individual craftsman. There probably wasn't a single, standardized Maya superglue formula written down in a manual. It was a living tradition, adaptable and refined. You watch Kook test the consistency. He lets a drip fall onto a cool stone. He watches how it spreads, how quickly it begins to set. He pokes at it with a stick. He seems satisfied. This particular batch, with its specific blend of pine resin, charcoal, and beeswax, is deemed ready. It's fascinating to think about the level of precision achieved without thermometers, viscometers, or any modern measuring equipment. It's all done by feel, by sight, by smell, by experience. It's the art and science of the craftsman. One quirky, and somewhat related, tidbit is the use of Maya blue, a famously resilient pigment used in murals and pottery. For a long time, its composition was a mystery, but it's now known to be an organic-inorganic hybrid material, created by heating indigo dye with palygorskite clay. This shows the Maya's sophisticated understanding of how to combine and transform natural materials to create new substances with unique and desirable properties, much like they did with their resin adhesives. They weren't just mixing stuff randomly, there was a method to their material magic. The pot of now-tempered resin is kept warm by the fire. It can't be allowed to cool and harden before it's applied. The next steps will involve preparing the arrow shaft and the arrowhead itself to receive this carefully concocted adhesive. The process is like a well-choreographed dance, each step leading logically to the next. The air in the hut is thick with the scent of heated pine and beeswax, a strangely comforting and ancient aroma. It smells of industry, of skill, of things being made by hand with care and attention. You realize that this secret additive mix isn't just about throwing a few extra ingredients into a pot. It's about understanding the fundamental properties of materials, about knowing how they interact, and about achieving a specific, desired outcome. It's a form of ancient engineering, played out on a small, sticky scale. The resin is now more than just glue. It's a carefully formulated composite material, ready to perform its critical function. The simple task of applying resin is revealing itself to be anything but simple. It's a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the Maya people. And you, a privileged observer, are getting a masterclass in stickiness. With the dark, viscous adhesive now simmering gently by the fire, its secret ingredients fully incorporated, Kook shifts his focus to the arrow shaft itself. The resin is ready, but the surfaces it will bind must also be perfectly prepared. He selects one of the seasoned reeds or saplings you examined earlier, sighting down its length to ensure its straightness one last time. Even a slight warp could send the arrow veering off course, a costly error in a hunt or a conflict. You try sighting down one yourself and realize it takes a keen eye to spot the subtle imperfections. They all look pretty straight to you, but Kook's standards are clearly higher. He's probably thinking your idea of straight is what a politician calls a direct answer. His attention first goes to the forend of the shaft, the part that will receive the arrowhead. This end needs to be shaped to create a secure seat for the stone point. Using one of his sharp chert flakes, Cook begins to carefully carve a shallow notch or slot into the tip of the shaft. This isn't a deep split, which might weaken the wood, but rather a precisely shaped indentation that matches the base of the arrowhead. He works with incredible precision, removing small shavings of wood with each controlled movement. The reed is surprisingly tough, and you can see the focused effort in his hands. He frequently picks up one of the arrowheads, the specific one he intends to haft to this particular shaft, and tests the fit. He's looking for a snug connection, with no wobbling or looseness. The base of the arrowhead should sit flush within the prepared notch, maximizing the contact area for the resin. This meticulous fitting process is crucial. If the fit is poor, the resin will have to do all the work of filling gaps, potentially creating weak points. It's a bit like carpentry. The better the joinery, the stronger the final piece. You recall assembling flat-pack furniture where one misaligned dowel threw the whole thing off. This is the ancient, high-stakes version of that. Once he's satisfied with the fit of the arrowhead in the forend, he turns his attention to the other end of the shaft, the nock. This is the small notch that will grip the bowstring. While some shafts might have come with a naturally occurring nock if a forked branch was used, most were likely carved. Using a smaller, finer stone tool, perhaps even a sharp piece of obsidian, Cook meticulously carves or refines the nock. It needs to be deep enough to hold the string securely, but not so deep as to weaken the shaft. The width of the nock must also match the thickness of the bowstring. Too tight, and it could impede a smooth release. Too loose, and the arrow might slip off the string at the critical moment of drawing. He might also slightly smooth the edges of the nock to prevent any abrasion or wear on the bowstring. Bowstrings themselves were valuable items, often made from twisted plant fibers, like agave or sisal, or animal sinew, and carefully waxed. Protecting the string was just as important as protecting the arrow. This attention to detail at both ends of the shaft underscores the holistic approach to arrow making. It's not just about sticking a point on a stick, it's about creating a perfectly balanced and functional projectile. After shaping the forend and the nock, Cook might also lightly roughen the surface of the shaft where the sinew binding will be applied, just below the arrowhead. Similar to preparing the base of the arrowhead, this slight abrasion gives the resin and sinew a better purchase on the smooth wood. He uses a piece of rough stone or perhaps even a coarse chert flake, scuffing the surface just enough without removing too much material or weakening the shaft. It's all about enhancing adhesion. One mainstream historical fact is that arrow making was a specialized skill in many cultures, and often, different parts of the arrow, point, shaft, fletching, might be made by different specialists and then assembled. Whether Cook is a generalist or a specialist in hafting is unclear, but his skill is undeniable. You wonder if there were Maya fletchers who specialized only in attaching the feathers that would stabilize the arrow's flight. Feathers, usually from large birds like turkeys or eagles, would be attached near the nock end, typically with fine thread and smaller amounts of adhesive. That's a whole other lesson in precision, though not on tonight's agenda of sticky fingers. As Cook works, you notice the economy of his movements. No wasted effort, no hesitation. Each cut, each scrape, is purposeful. This shaft-shaping ritual, as it feels to you, is a demonstration of muscle memory and deep understanding of the materials. He knows exactly how much pressure to apply, what angle to hold the tool, how the wood will respond. This isn't something you learn from a book, or even a single viewing. It's learned through years, perhaps decades, of practice. You try to imagine yourself attempting to carve a precise slot with a sharp piece of rock without either splitting the shaft or slicing your own finger. The odds, you suspect, would not be in your favor. One quirky or fringe tidbit concerns the owner's marks or decorations sometimes found on arrow shafts in various cultures. While not extensively documented for all Maya arrows, it's plausible that individual hunters or warriors might have marked their arrows in some way, perhaps with painted bands or incised symbols. to identify their kills or simply to distinguish their arrows from others. Imagine the post-hunt arguments. No, that's my arrow in the peccary. See the little squiggle? The shaft is now fully prepared. The forend is perfectly shaped to receive its deadly stone partner. The nock is ready to embrace the bowstring, and the surface is prepped for the binding that will secure everything together. The stage is meticulously set. The tempered resin is warm and waiting. The arrowhead lies ready. The next step will involve bringing these elements together, a delicate operation that requires a steady hand and a good understanding of how hot, sticky resin behaves. The quiet hum of the jungle outside seems to fade as your focus narrows to the imminent joining of stone and wood. The arrow shaft, perfectly nocked and notched, lies ready. The pot of dark, viscous resin simmers gently, its piney, waxy aroma filling the hut. Cook now turns his attention to the final preparatory step before the actual application of the adhesive, the gentle warming of the arrowhead itself. This might seem like a small detail, but in the world of ancient adhesives, particularly resin-based ones, temperature is a critical variable. You wouldn't want to apply hot resin to a cold stone, as the rapid cooling could cause the resin to set too quickly, potentially creating a weak or incomplete bond. Cook selects the specific obsidian arrowhead he has been working with, the one whose base perfectly matches the slot he carved in the arrow shaft. He doesn't place it directly in the fire, of course. Obsidian, being a type of glass, can crack or even shatter if subjected to thermal shock, a sudden, extreme change in temperature. Instead, he places the arrowhead on a flat, warm stone that has been sitting near the edge of the fire pit, absorbing its heat indirectly. It's the ancient equivalent of a warming plate. He's aiming for a gentle, even warmth, bringing the arrowhead's temperature closer to that of the molten resin. He periodically touches the arrowhead, not with his bare finger on the sharp edges. He's far too experienced for that rookie mistake, but perhaps by touching the stone it rests on, or by holding his hand near it to gauge its radiated warmth. He's looking for that Goldilocks temperature, not too hot, not too cold, but just right. If the stone is too hot, it could degrade the resin or make it too runny. If it's too cold, the resin might solidify prematurely, failing to penetrate any microscopic pores or crevices in the stone or wood, which are essential for a strong mechanical bond. You imagine him developing this sense of temperature over years, much like a chef knows the feel of perfectly proofed dough or the sizzle of a correctly heated pan. This preheating also serves another purpose. It helps to ensure that both the arrowhead and the tip of the shaft are completely dry. Any moisture present on the surfaces to be joined could compromise the adhesion of the resin, which is generally hydrophobic, water-repelling. The jungle environment is, as you are acutely aware, incredibly humid. Even materials that feel dry to the touch might harbor a thin film of moisture. The gentle heat would drive off any such lingering dampness. It's another small but crucial detail in the pursuit of a perfect bond. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Probably didn't need pre-warming. As the arrowhead warms, Cook might also give the arrow shaft's forend a brief pass near the fire, again, not to scorch it, but just to ensure it's also warm and dry. It's all about creating the optimal conditions for the resin to work its magic. You can see how this entire process is a constant management of heat, heating the resin, warming the components, all powered by that single, carefully tended fire. The fire is more than just a source of light or warmth, it's a fundamental tool of transformation. Historians still argue whether preheating of components was a universal practice in all ancient hafting technologies, or if it varied depending on the specific adhesive and materials used. However, for resin-based glues, especially in humid environments, the benefits of warming and drying the substrates seem fairly clear from a materials science perspective, even if the ancient craftsmen understood it through empirical observation rather than textbooks. They knew what worked. One mainstream historical fact is that obsidian, due to its volcanic origin, is found only in specific geological areas. For the Maya, Major sources included highland Guatemala, particularly sites like El Chale and Ixtepic. The obsidian from these sources was traded extensively throughout the Maya world and even beyond, reaching far into Mexico and Central America. The presence of obsidian arrowheads in a lowland jungle village like this speaks volumes about the reach and complexity of Maya trade routes, often traversing difficult terrain without the aid of draft animals or wheeled vehicles. Each arrowhead carries a silent story of that journey. You ponder the arrowhead, now gently warming. It's a piece of Earth's fiery past, soon to be joined to a product of the forest, all through the sticky magic of pine sap and human ingenuity. The stone's gentle warmth is an invitation to the resin, a preparation for the intimate bond they are about to form. Kook seems to sense the moment the arrowhead has reached its ideal temperature. There's no timer, no thermometer, just his experienced judgment. He picks it up, perhaps using a small piece of hide or a couple of sticks to handle it if it's more than just pleasantly warm, though he handles it with a familiarity that suggests he knows its heat intimately. The quiet anticipation in the hut is palpable. All the preliminary steps, the resin collection, its purification and tempering, the shaft preparation, and now the warming of the stone, have led to this point. The next stage is the actual application of the adhesive, the moment when these disparate parts begin to become a single, functional whole. You find yourself holding your breath slightly, as if any sudden movement might disturb the delicate balance Kook has so carefully orchestrated. The warm stone, now ready, feels like a silent promise of the strong, enduring connection to come. It's a small detail, this warming, but it's the kind of detail that separates a master from an apprentice, a lethal weapon from a disappointing clunker. And nobody wants a clunker when a peccary is charging. The arrowhead, now pleasantly warm, rests expectantly. The shaft, perfectly prepared, is at hand. The pot of dark, viscous, tempered resin simmers invitingly by the fire. Kook takes a deep, steadying breath, or at least, you project that onto him, as he seems utterly composed, the picture of calm expertise. This is the moment of truth for the adhesive, the resin's initial coat. This first layer is arguably the most critical, as it forms the primary bond between the arrowhead and the shaft. It needs to be applied evenly, without bubbles or gaps, and at the right temperature to ensure good flow and penetration into any microscopic irregularities in the stone and wood. Kook dips his trusty wooden paddle, the one he used for stirring and testing the resin, into the pot. He draws it out, coated with a thick, glistening layer of the dark adhesive. He lets the excess drip back into the pot for a moment, aiming for just the right amount on his paddle. Too much, and it will be messy and squeezed out excessively when the arrowhead is inserted. Too little, and the bond will be weak. Again, it's that experienced judgment at play. You try to imagine doing this without ending up with resin up to your elbows, or inadvertently gluing the paddle to the pot, or yourself to the floor. The potential for comical disaster, in your less skilled hands, seems immense. With the loaded paddle, he carefully applies a thin, even coat of the hot resin to the base of the warmed arrowhead, the part that will be inserted into the slot on the shaft. He works quickly but deliberately, spreading the resin smoothly. He also applies a similar thin coat of resin into the carved notch at the fore end of the arrow shaft itself. This priming of both surfaces ensures that there is resin-to-resin contact when they are joined, which often creates a stronger bond than resin-to-raw material alone. It's a technique still used in modern gluing applications. Always apply adhesive to both surfaces if you want the best possible hold. He doesn't just slather it on. He uses the paddle to work the resin into the surfaces, ensuring it makes good contact. The warmth of the arrowhead and shaft helps the resin flow, allowing it to seep into any tiny pores or crevices, creating a strong mechanical lock in addition to the chemical adhesion. You can almost see the resin molecules snuggling up to the stone and wood molecules, getting ready for a long-term relationship. It's a surprisingly intimate process, this joining of materials. Once both the arrowhead's base and the shaft slot are coated, Kook wastes no time. The resin is cooling with every passing second, and its workability will decrease. He picks up the arrowhead, again, perhaps with a small piece of hide if it's still quite warm, though often they be handled with toughened fingers, and carefully, precisely, inserts its resin base into the resin slot of the arrow shaft. He pushes it in firmly, ensuring it's seated deeply and correctly aligned with the shaft. A small amount of excess resin might squeeze out around the join, which is a good sign. It indicates that there was sufficient adhesive to fill the space completely. He might give it a slight twist to ensure the resin is distributed evenly within the joint. The alignment is crucial. The arrowhead must be perfectly in line with the shaft's axis. Any cant or misalignment will cause the arrow to fly erratically, like a badly thrown dart. Kook sights down the shaft, checking the alignment from multiple angles, making tiny adjustments while the resin is still somewhat pliable. His eye for straightness is, by now, legendary in your mind. He's like a human laser level. This initial application of resin is not the end of the process, not by a long shot. It's the foundational layer, the primary grip. The sinew wrapping, which comes next, will provide mechanical strength and reinforcement, but it too will be saturated and sealed with more resin. However, if this first coat fails, if the bond between stone and wood isn't sound at this stage, then no amount of sinew will make it truly reliable. It's the bedrock of the entire haft. One mainstream historical fact is that hafting techniques varied considerably across different cultures and time periods, depending on the tools being made, arrows, spears, axes, knives, the available materials, and local traditions. Some cultures used bitumen, birch bark tar, or other natural adhesives, sometimes in combination with mechanical fixings like wedges or pins, in addition to bindings. The Maya use of pine resin and sinew was a highly effective system for their particular needs and environment. You watch as Kook holds the newly joined arrowhead and shaft steady for a few moments, allowing the resin to begin to set. The heat from the components continues to keep the resin workable for a short period, but it will soon begin to stiffen as it cools. He doesn't rush this. There's a quiet patience to his work that is almost hypnotic. It makes you think about how much patience is required for so many boring but essential tasks that keep the world turning, from ancient arrow making to, say, meticulously editing a 15,000-word script. One quirky or fringe tidbit relates to the ritual killing of objects in some ancient cultures. Sometimes, weapons or tools placed in burials were intentionally broken or bent. While the reasons are debated, perhaps to release their spirit, or to prevent grave robbing, or to signify an end to their use, it makes you wonder if there was ever a ritual unhafting process, or if arrowheads were sometimes intentionally made with a weaker resin bond for specific ceremonial purposes where they were meant to detach. Probably not for everyday hunting arrows, though. You want those to stay firmly attached. The resin's initial coat is now in place, forming that crucial, intimate connection. The arrowhead and shaft are united, though their bond is still young and needs further reinforcement. The dark, glistening resin at the join is a visible promise of the strength to come. The air is still thick with the scent of pine and beeswax, the soundtrack of creation in Kook's humble workshop. The next step will be to add the power of sinew, further securing this marriage of stone and wood. The arrowhead is now seated in the shaft, held in place by that crucial first coat of dark, warm resin. But Kook knows that resin alone, especially for a high-impact tool like an arrowhead, might not be enough. The shock of impact when the arrow strikes its target, or even if it hits a tree or hard ground on a miss, could fracture a resin-only bond. To truly secure the hafting and give it resilience, mechanical reinforcement is needed. This is where the sinew binding comes into its own, adding immense strength and durability to the join. Kook picks up one of the dried strips of sinew you saw earlier, those pale, translucent ribbons of animal tendon. He selects a strip of appropriate length and thickness. He then dips it into a small gourd of water that's been sitting nearby. The dried sinew is stiff and somewhat brittle, but as it absorbs the water, it quickly becomes soft, pliable, and slightly slippery, almost like wet rawhide or a very thick noodle. This transformation is key to its effectiveness. As this moistened sinew is wrapped tightly around the joint and then dries, it will shrink, pulling the binding incredibly taut and clamping the arrowhead, resin, and shaft together with tremendous force. It's nature's own high tensile strapping. He takes the arrow, now with its freshly attached point, and begins to wrap the moistened sinew around the junction where the base of the arrowhead meets the wooden shaft. He starts the wrapping on the wood itself, just below the base of the arrowhead, and works his way upwards, overlapping the sinew onto the lower portion of the stone point. The wrapping is tight and precise. Each turn of the sinew is laid down snugly against the previous one, with no gaps or loose spots. His fingers, though calloused, are surprisingly nimble as he manipulates the slippery sinew strip. He applies considerable tension as he wraps. You can see the sinew stretching slightly, conforming to the contours of the shaft and the arrowhead base. This tension is vital for achieving that powerful clamping effect when it dries. It's a bit like winding a very strong, flat thread. He might use a small, smooth piece of bone or wood to help tuck the end of the sinew under the wraps to secure it, or he might simply rely on the stickiness of the underlying resin and the overlapping layers of sinew to hold the end in place. The pattern of wrapping can also be important. Sometimes it's a simple spiral, but often it involves cross-wrapping or specific patterns designed to provide maximum strength and prevent the arrowhead from twisting or pulling out. For arrowheads with side notches, the sinew would be carefully worked into these notches, providing an even more secure mechanical lock. You observe Cook working the sinew skillfully around the base of the point, ensuring it covers the junction completely and extends a little way up the stone and down the shaft, distributing the stress over a wider area. It's like he's weaving a tiny, incredibly strong corset for the arrowhead. This process of sinew binding is not unique to the Maya. It was a common technique used by many cultures around the world for hafting tools and weapons. From Native American arrows and spears to tools from ancient Egypt and Europe, sinew was a go-to material for strong, reliable bindings. Its natural properties make it perfectly suited for the task. One mainstream historical fact is that the effectiveness of sinew as a binding agent is well documented ethnographically and archaeologically. Its tensile strength, when dry, is remarkable. As Cook wraps, you can see how the pale, wet sinew contrasts with the dark resin and the wood. It's a clear visual indicator of this added layer of security. You can imagine the forces this binding will have to withstand. Not just the forward shock of impact, but also any lateral stresses if the arrow doesn't fly perfectly true or hits an angled surface. The sinew provides a degree of flexibility and shock absorption that complements the more rigid adhesion of the resin. Resin is the glue, sinew is the clamp and the safety cable, all in one. One quirky or fringe tidbit: some traditions involve chewing the sinew to soften it and work saliva into the fibers, which some believed made it even stronger or more pliable. You glance at Cook, but he seems content with his gourd of water, much to your relief. The thought of sinew gum is even less appealing than pine resin gum. You're beginning to think ancient craftspeople had stomachs of iron, or at least very different culinary and material preparation habits. He continues to wrap, layer upon layer, until a thick, secure binding is formed. The amount of sinew used would depend on the size of the arrowhead and the intended use of the arrow. A larger point, or one intended for tougher game, would likely receive a more substantial binding. He smooths down the wet sinew with his fingers, ensuring it's all lying flat and tight. The junction of arrowhead and shaft now looks much more robust, encased in this pale, glistening band. Historians still argue whether sinew was always applied wet, or if dry sinew might have been used in conjunction with adhesives that also helped to soften and integrate it. However, The shrinking properties of wet-applied sinew are so advantageous for creating a tight binding that it's widely assumed to have been the predominant method. The sinew binding is now complete, a tight, wet corset around the critical junction. It looks strong already, but its real power will come when it dries and shrinks, cinching everything together with an unyielding grip. But Kook isn't quite done with the resin yet. This newly applied sinew, while strong, is still vulnerable to moisture and abrasion. The final step in sealing this powerful mechanical bond will involve another coat of that carefully prepared pine resin. The arrow is almost complete, its lethality and durability carefully engineered from humble, natural materials. The quiet focus in the hut remains unbroken, a testament to the seriousness of this ancient craft. The arrow shaft, now bearing its stone point, and the tightly wound corset of wet sinew, feels substantially more complete. The sinew, glistening and pale, has added a visible layer of robust strength to the haft. However, Kook knows that raw sinew, for all its tensile strength when dry, has a weakness: moisture. If the sinew were to get wet again, it could soften, stretch, and lose its vital tension, potentially compromising the entire haft. Furthermore, sinew is an organic material, and like any such material, it's susceptible to rot, decay, and even hungry insects if left unprotected, especially in the humid jungle environment. Therefore, the next crucial step is to seal and protect the sinew binding thoroughly. And for that, Kook returns to his pot of dark, simmering pine resin. He takes his wooden paddle, dips it once more into the warm, tempered adhesive, and this time, he applies a generous coat of resin over the entire sinew-wrapped area. He works methodically, ensuring that the resin penetrates into all the crevices between the sinew strands and thoroughly saturates the binding. This isn't just a surface coat, he's aiming to impregnate the sinew with the resin. This will make the sinew waterproof, protect it from abrasion, and also help to bind the sinew fibers together, creating a solid, composite material. It's like encasing the sinew in a protective, adhesive armor. As he applies the resin, the pale sinew darkens, taking on the rich, almost black color of the adhesive. The distinct strands of the binding become less visible as they are enveloped by the smooth, glossy coat of resin. Kook uses the paddle to spread the resin evenly, ensuring there are no dry spots or areas where the sinew is left exposed. He also makes sure the resin forms a smooth transition from the arrowhead itself, over the sinew, and onto the wooden shaft. This helps to shed water and prevents snagging. You can see how this second, thicker layer of resin not only protects the sinew but also adds another layer of adhesion to the overall haft, further locking the arrowhead in place. It's a belt and suspenders approach, ancient Maya style. Very sensible. He might gently warm the resin area near the fire for a moment, not too close, but just enough to help the fresh resin flow smoothly and evenly, and to encourage it to fully penetrate and bond with the underlying sinew and the first resin layer. This gentle heating can also help to drive out any tiny air bubbles that might have been trapped in the resin, ensuring a solid, void-free seal. It's all about achieving that perfect, impervious coating. You imagine this arrow, once completed, being able to withstand a downpour or being accidentally dropped in a puddle, though hopefully not for too long, without the hafting failing. That's the kind of reliability you need when your dinner, or your life, depends on it. This process of sealing the sinew also adds a bit of extra weight and stiffness to the forend of the arrow, which can actually be beneficial for its flight dynamics, contributing to its stability and penetration. It's another example of how these ancient craftsmen, through intuition and experience, often arrived at solutions that are remarkably well engineered. They didn't have wind tunnels or computer simulations, but they had generations of observation of what flew straight and hit hard. One mainstream historical fact is that the use of resin to waterproof and protect bindings and other materials was widespread in many ancient cultures. Birch bark tar, for example, was used in Neolithic Europe for similar purposes, hafting tools and waterproofing containers. The specific type of resin or tar varied by region and available resources, but the underlying principle of using these natural polymers for protection and adhesion was a common technological thread. As Cook finishes applying this sealing coat, the junction of the arrowhead and shaft now looks incredibly solid and well integrated. The transition from stone to wood is smooth and black, almost seamless. It's a far cry from simply sticking a point into a piece of wood. This is a carefully constructed, multi-component system, designed for strength, durability, and lethality. You're starting to think that if you ever had to choose an ancient adhesive, you'd definitely go for the Cook Special Blend with charcoal and beeswax, fully sealed. It seems pretty indestructible. One quirky or fringe tidbit: in some cultures, decorative elements like colored pigments or even tiny shell beads were sometimes pressed into the still soft resin of a hafting before it fully cured, adding a personal touch or perhaps a symbolic meaning to the tool or weapon. While Cook's approach seems purely functional, it's a reminder that utility and artistry often went hand in hand in the ancient world. Maybe the perfectly smooth, glossy black finish is the art form here, the beauty of functional perfection. Historians still argue whether additional surface treatments were applied over the final resin coat, perhaps a layer of wax polish to a high shine, or even a coating of a different type of plant-based lacquer for extra durability or a specific finish. The evidence for such final touches can be difficult to discern archaeologically, as these thin organic layers rarely survive. The sinew is now securely encased, protected from the elements and locked into place. The second, thicker layer of resin has transformed the binding into a solid, unified mass, bonding powerfully with the arrowhead, the shaft, and the sinew itself. The arrow feels more complete than ever, its deadly purpose now matched by the evident strength of its construction. But the resin is still warm, still slightly soft. The next crucial stage is to allow it to cool and cure properly, and then, to ensure that the application is truly even, a skill in itself. The arrow now looks nearly complete. The obsidian point is firmly seated, the sinew binding is tight and strong, and everything is encased in that glossy, dark, protective layer of pine resin, beeswax, and charcoal. But Cook's work isn't quite finished. The resin, while generously applied to seal the sinew, needs to be perfectly and evenly distributed. Any lumps, bumps, or uneven thickness in this final resin coat could potentially affect the arrow's flight, creating drag or an imbalance. More importantly, an uneven distribution might indicate areas where the resin is too thin, offering less protection to the sinew, or too thick, potentially leading to cracking or chipping if it's a brittle spot. The goal is a smooth, aerodynamic, and uniformly strong finish. Cook holds the arrow horizontally, slowly rotating it. His keen eyes scan the freshly resined area, looking for any imperfections. The resin is still warm and workable, but it's beginning to set. He has a limited window of opportunity to make these final adjustments. If he sees a slight bulge or an area where the resin is too thick, he might use his warm wooden paddle, or even a wetted finger, a brave move with hot resin, but one that experienced hands might manage without a burn, to gently smooth it out, redistributing the still pliable adhesive. If there's a spot that looks a little thin, he might add a tiny dab more resin from the pot and blend it in seamlessly. This is where the true artistry of even application comes to the fore. It's not just about slapping on enough glue, it's about finesse, control, and an understanding of how the material behaves as it cools and solidifies. He might gently roll the shaft between his palms, using the even pressure and warmth from his hands to help smooth and shape the resin coat. The heat from his hands could provide just enough localized warmth to keep the resin malleable for a few moments longer, allowing him to achieve that perfect contour. You can imagine this technique is much harder than it looks, requiring just the right touch. Too much pressure and you displace the resin unevenly, too little and you don't achieve the smoothness. He pays particular attention to the transitions, where the resin meets the bare stone of the arrowhead and where it feathers out onto the wooden shaft. These junctions need to be smooth and tapered, with no abrupt edges that could catch or create weak points. A smooth taper also contributes to better aerodynamics. You're reminded of shaping icing on a cake, trying to get that perfectly smooth finish, except this cake is designed to fly at high speed and deliver a rather unpleasant surprise, not be eaten at a birthday party. The stakes are a little higher. Sometimes, to achieve a very smooth surface, craftsmen in various traditions might use a piece of wet leather or even their own saliva, again with the saliva. These ancient craftsmen were resourceful, if not always adhering to modern hygiene standards, to slick the surface of the cooling resin. The moisture prevents the resin from sticking to the smoothing tool, or finger, allowing it to glide over the surface and compact the resin into a dense, glossy finish. Kook, however, seems to rely on his skillful manipulation with the paddle in his hands, perhaps with a touch of water if needed. One mainstream historical fact is that the fletching of an arrow, the feathers attached near the nock to stabilize its flight, also required incredibly precise placement and adhesion. While we're focused on the arrowhead, it's worth remembering that the entire arrow was a system, and the evenness and balance of every component contributed to its accuracy. The skills Kook is demonstrating with the resin here would be just as applicable, though perhaps with a finer adhesive, to attaching those delicate feathers. As he works, you notice the intense concentration on his face. His world is narrowed to this small section of the arrow, this critical interface between life-giving tool and the materials of the forest. There's a meditative quality to his movements, a rhythm born of countless repetitions. He's not just applying resin, he's sculpting it, coaxing it into its final, perfect form. It's a subtle dance of heat, pressure, and timing. Historians still argue whether specialized tools were developed for smoothing resin in this way, perhaps shaped bone or wooden spatulas, or even smooth, heated stones. The archaeological record for such fine tools can be elusive, as they might not always be recognized for their specific purpose, or they might have been made of perishable materials. Kook's toolkit seems simple, but his skill elevates these simple tools to instruments of precision. One quirky or fringe tidbit relates to sympathetic magic in some cultures, where the appearance of a tool was believed to influence its effectiveness. A smooth, perfectly finished arrowhead hafting might have been thought to contribute to a smooth flight or a clean kill, not just for practical aerodynamic reasons, but for magical ones too. While we can only speculate if such beliefs were held by Kook, the care he takes certainly suggests he wants this arrow to be as perfect as possible, in every respect. He holds the arrow up, sighting along its length one more time, rotating it slowly, his eyes critically assessing the sheen and contour of the resin. A slight adjustment here with a wetted thumb, a gentle smoothing there with the edge of his paddle. He's like a painter adding the final, subtle highlights to a masterpiece, except his canvas is a tool of survival, and his paint is sticky, black resin. Finally, he seems satisfied. The resin coat is smooth, even, and seamlessly integrated with both the arrowhead and the shaft. It gleams dully in the firelight, a testament to his skill. The arrow is now, truly, a thing of dangerous beauty. The next, and equally important, step is to let this carefully crafted bond cool and cure completely, allowing the resin to achieve its full, tenacious strength. The arrow, now a sleek, unified instrument of potential destruction, has its obsidian point perfectly aligned, its sinew binding tight and secure, and its final resin coat smooth and even, gleaming darkly in the firelight. Kook has done his part in the active construction. Now, nature, or rather, the inexorable process of cooling and curing, must take over. This stage of cooling's crucial calm is as important as any of the active steps of preparation and application. Rushing the cooling process, or disturbing the arrow while the resin is still setting, could introduce stresses or imperfections into the bond, weakening the entire structure. Patience, once again, is the watchword. Kook carefully places the newly hafted arrow in a safe spot within the hut. He doesn't just lean it against a wall where it might be knocked over by a stray dog or a clumsy apprentice. You discreetly check that your feet are well clear of its vicinity. Instead, he might have a designated rack or a special grooved piece of wood designed to hold arrows horizontally while they cure, ensuring that gravity doesn't cause the still soft resin to sag or deform. The arrow needs to rest undisturbed, allowing the resin to cool slowly and evenly, and for the moisture within the stretched sinew to fully evaporate, causing it to shrink and achieve its maximum clamping force. The curing time for pine resin adhesive can vary depending on several factors: the exact composition of the resin mix, the addition of beeswax, for example, might alter its setting time, the ambient temperature and humidity, and the thickness of the resin application. It's not an instant process like modern superglues. This could take several hours, or even overnight, for the resin to achieve its full hardness and bonding strength. You imagine Kook would likely work on several arrows in a session, so that while one set is curing, he can be preparing the next batch. It's an efficient workflow, honed by experience. During this cooling and curing period, the resin undergoes a physical and chemical transformation. As it cools, its viscosity increases dramatically, and it transitions from a liquid or semi-liquid state to a solid. The volatile compounds within the resin continue to evaporate. The beeswax, if included, will solidify, adding to the toughness and water resistance of the mixture. The charcoal particles remain suspended within the resin matrix, acting as a filler and reinforcer. Meanwhile, the sinew, as it dries, shrinks by a significant percentage of its length, pulling the entire hafting, arrowhead, resin, and shaft into an incredibly tight, integrated unit. This synergistic combination of adhesive bonding from the resin and mechanical compression from the sinew is what gives the Maya Arrowhead hafting its legendary strength. You can almost feel the quiet tension building within the haft as the sinew shrinks, an invisible force locking everything rigidly in place. It's a slow, silent process, but one of immense power. You think about those time-lapse videos of plants growing or flowers blooming. If you could do a time-lapse of the sinew drying and shrinking at a microscopic level, it would be a dramatic display of natural engineering. One mainstream historical fact is that understanding curing times and processes for natural adhesives was critical for ancient artisans. For example, the curing of lime mortar in Maya construction, used to bind stones in their monumental architecture, was a slow process that could take weeks or even months to achieve full strength as the calcium hydroxide reacted with atmospheric carbon dioxide to form calcium carbonate. Similarly, Kook knows he cannot rush the arrow. While the arrow rests, life in the village continues. The sounds from outside the hut, the distant chatter of children, the rhythmic thump of someone grinding maize, the occasional call of a tropical bird, filter in, a reminder that this intricate craft is embedded within a vibrant community. Kook might turn his attention to preparing more shafts, or flaking more obsidian points, or perhaps just sit quietly, observing the fire. There's no sense of impatience, just a calm acceptance of the materials and _D times requirements. It's a stark contrast to our modern world of instant gratification and rapid set epoxies. Sometimes, you realize, the best way to make something strong is to let it take its time. One quirky or fringe tidbit: some cultures had specific rituals or superstitions associated with the curing process of important tools or weapons. Perhaps a particular incantation was whispered over the resting arrow, or it was placed in a specific orientation relative to the sun or moon, believed to imbue it with better luck or greater power. While we don't have direct evidence of this from Maya arrow making in this specific context, the deep spiritual connection the Maya had with the natural world makes it plausible that such beliefs might have existed. Maybe leaving it near the sacred ceiba tree's image in the corner of the hut gave it an extra oomph. Historians still argue whether Maya craft production was purely utilitarian or if it was always intertwined with ritual and cosmology, even for everyday objects. Given the pervasiveness of their religious beliefs, it's likely that even the most practical activities had a sacred dimension. The hut grows dimmer as the afternoon sun begins to wane, its light filtering more obliquely through the doorway. The air cools slightly, though the humidity remains. The arrow lies still, its resin slowly hardening, its sinew slowly tightening. It's in a state of quiet transformation, gathering its strength. You feel a sense of calm just observing this unhurried process. It's a reminder that not everything needs to be rushed, that some of the strongest things are created slowly, with care and patience. The crucial calm of the cooling period is an integral part of the arrow's birth. Soon, it will be ready for its final inspection, and then, for its ultimate purpose, whatever that may be. The anticipation for that final reveal, the test of the finished bond, hangs gently in the air. Hours have passed. The light outside Cook's hut has softened into the dusky hues of late afternoon, painting the jungle in shades of gray and deep green. Inside, the embers of the fire glow with a warm, steady pulse, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The arrow, or perhaps a series of arrows if Cook has been particularly productive, has been resting undisturbed, allowing the carefully applied resin to cool, harden, and fully cure, and the sinew beneath to shrink and draw everything into an unyielding embrace. The crucial calm has done its work. Now, it's time for the final bond test, the moment Cook assesses the success of his meticulous labor. He approaches the resting arrow with the same quiet deliberateness he has shown throughout the entire process. He picks it up carefully. The resin, which was glossy and almost liquid when first applied, is now hard and cool to the touch. It no longer yields to fingertip pressure. It is set into a solid, robust casing around the sinew and the junction of the arrowhead and shaft. The arrow feels different now, no longer a collection of disparate parts, but a single, integrated tool, imbued with a sense of latent power. Cook first performs a visual inspection. He rotates the arrow slowly, his experienced eyes scrutinizing every aspect of the hafting. He looks for any cracks, bubbles, or imperfections in the resin surface that might have developed during cooling. He checks the alignment of the arrowhead one last time, ensuring it's still perfectly true with the shaft. He examines the transitions where the resin meets the stone and the wood, making sure the seal is complete and smooth. His gaze is intense, like a jeweler inspecting a precious gem for flaws. This arrow is, in its own way, a jewel of Maya technology. Then comes the physical test. This isn't a destructive test, of course. He's not going to try and snap it in half, unless it's a particularly bad apprentice piece, perhaps, destined for the what not to do pile. Instead, he applies gentle but firm pressure to the arrowhead, trying to wiggle it or twist it in its haft. He might push and pull on it slightly. He's feeling for any give, any looseness, any sign that the bond is not as solid as it should be. His hands, so skilled in the making, are now equally skilled in the testing, sensitive to the slightest hint of weakness. You watch, holding your breath slightly. After all that work, you're invested in this arrow's success, even if it's just an observer's investment. He might tap the side of the arrowhead lightly with a piece of wood or antler, listening to the sound it makes. A solid, well-hafted point will produce a clear, firm sound, indicating a tight, void-free bond. A dull thud or a rattling sound might suggest a problem, perhaps an air pocket in the resin, or a failure of adhesion in some spot. It's a subtle form of non-destructive testing, an ancient craftsman's version of an ultrasound. Satisfied with these initial tests, he might then perform a slightly more rigorous one. He might, for example, flex the arrow shaft slightly near the hafting, observing how the joint behaves under stress. Or he might, very carefully, away from anyone, simulate a gentle impact, perhaps by lightly tapping the arrow's point against a piece of soft wood, to see if the shock dislodges anything. These tests are designed to mimic, in a controlled way, the stresses the arrow will encounter in actual use. Remember that warning about not surviving if you mess this up? This is the quality control that prevents that unfortunate outcome. One mainstream historical fact, the effectiveness of an arrow, and thus the reputation of its maker, depended entirely on its reliability. A hunter or warrior needed to have absolute confidence in their equipment. A failed hafting at a critical moment could mean a lost meal, a lost opportunity, or far worse, injury or death. Therefore, the final inspection and testing were not mere formalities but essential steps in ensuring the tool's fitness for purpose. As Coop completes his tests, a subtle nod, a slight grunt of satisfaction, indicates that this arrow has passed muster. The bond is strong, the hafting secure. The obsidian point is now a permanent, lethal extension of the reed shaft. It is ready. Ready for the bow, ready for flight, ready to fulfill its destiny, whether that's bringing down a swift deer in the forest depths, defending the village from harm, or perhaps even playing a role in some sacred ritual. He places the finished arrow with a few others that have met his exacting standards. They lie together, a small clutch of deadly elegance, each one a testament to the intimate knowledge of natural materials, patient skill, and the timeless human drive to create effective tools. You look at the finished product, and it's hard to believe it started as a sticky ooze from a pine tree, a chunk of volcanic glass, a strip of animal tendon, and a simple reed. Cook has transformed these humble elements into something far greater than the sum of its parts. Historians still argue whether Maya arrowmakers specialized in points for different game or purposes to the extent seen in some other cultures, e.g., specific bird points, fish points, big game points with different barb designs. While there's variation in Maya point styles, the precise correlation with specific prey is an ongoing area of research. One quirky or fringe tidbit is that some arrows, in various cultures, were fumed or smoked after completion, perhaps over aromatic herbs. This might have been to further harden the wood, add a protective layer, sent them to mask human odor from prey, or for purely ritualistic purposes. Whether Coop performs such a final step is unknown, but the arrow already smells faintly of its pine resin heart. You reflect on the journey. From the humid arrival in the jungle, the quest for the perfect pine, the careful tapping of its sticky gold, gathering the hafting kit, appraising the sharp arrowhead, the resin's first cleanse, blending in secret additives, shaping the shaft, warming the stone, applying that critical first coat, the strength of the sinew binding, sealing it all with a second resin layer, ensuring its even spread, and the crucial calm of cooling and curing. It has been a long, detailed, and surprisingly mesmerizing process. You now understand that how to evenly apply pine resin on a Maya arrowhead is not a simple instruction, but a profound craft, a deep connection to the natural world, and a vital skill for survival and culture. The arrow, now complete, is a silent embodiment of all that knowledge. And so, the arrow is finished, a perfect union of stone, wood, sinew, and resin, testament to Cook's unwavering skill and the wisdom of generations. The dim light of the hut seems to settle around it, a quiet acknowledgement of its readiness. As you watch Coop carefully place it with its brethren, you feel a sense of completion, a gentle unwinding of the focused attention you've shared. The journey through this ancient craft, with its sticky intricacies and patient rhythms, now draws to a soft close. The sounds of the jungle, once a vibrant backdrop, begin to fade into a more distant, soothing murmur, like the gentle lapping of waves on a far-off shore. The sharp, clean scent of pine and beeswax, which has been your constant companion, now softens, becoming less a call to action and more a comforting, familiar aroma, perhaps mingling with the imagined scent of cool night air drifting in. The image of the gleaming obsidian, the dark, smooth resin, the tightly bound sinew, all these details can now loosen their hold on your mind's eye, blurring slightly at the edges, becoming part of a peaceful, receding memory. You can let go of the focus, the careful observation, and allow your thoughts to drift as freely as a feather on a gentle breeze. The challenges of the jungle, the precision of the craft, the weight of survival, these can all become lighter now, floating away. There are no more steps to learn, no more techniques to scrutinize. The arrow is made. Its story, for tonight, is told. Let the remaining tension in your shoulders and neck dissolve, feel the support of whatever surface holds you, and allow your breathing to deepen, to slow, to find its own natural, easy rhythm. The subtle complexities of resin application, the patient waiting for the cure, all these can now become a gentle, repetitive thought, a soft hum in the background, lulling you further into tranquility. Sweet dreams.